The woman had been sitting on the concrete steps outside the shelter for the better part of 40 minutes, when Marcus Reed crouched down beside her without ceremony and without hesitation. He did not make a production of it. He did not look around to see if anyone was watching. He simply set his delivery bag against the iron railing, lowered himself to one knee on the cold November pavement, and looked at her directly. She was somewhere in her early 70s, with silver hair that had come loose from its pins and a wool coat that had once been expensive but now carried the particular exhaustion of something that had been everywhere and rested nowhere. She held a paper coffee cup in both hands, though it had been empty for a while. Her eyes were sharp and very still, the kind of eyes that had seen a great deal and had long since stopped being surprised by any of it. "You eat today?" Marcus asked. She looked at him. Not the way most people looked at delivery drivers, past them, through them, at whatever was behind them, but directly, with complete and unhurried attention. The way someone looked at a thing they were trying to understand before deciding what to do with it. "Not yet," she said. Marcus reached into his jacket pocket. He had counted that morning, out of the specific discipline of a man who could not afford to forget what he had, $23 and a pharmacy receipt from the night before, when Lily's cough had gotten bad enough to warrant the CVS on Clement Street at 10:30 in the evening. That was what remained until Friday. He took out the 20 and held it toward her with the natural ease of a man performing an action he had already decided on and did not need to reconsider. She looked at the bill. She looked at his face. Something moved through her expression that was not quite gratitude and not quite surprise, but was something between the two that had no clean name. The expression of a person who has just seen something they were no longer certain still existed in the world and is still working out what to do with the discovery. She took it. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was quieter than her eyes suggested it would be. "There's a place 2 blocks east that does soup until 3, Marcus said, standing back up. "It's not bad." He adjusted the strap on his delivery bag. "You going to be warm enough out here?" "I'll be going in shortly," she said. He nodded and went back around the corner to finish the route. He did not know who she was. Within the hour, every person in that building would wish they had spent the morning differently. If you have ever given something you couldn't really spare to someone who needed it more, this one is for you. Stay with us. Marcus Reed had a system for Tuesdays, and it had not changed in 2 years and 3 months. He was out the door by 6:40, which gave him exactly 20 minutes to drop Lily at school before the first bell and still make it to the distribution center on Hargrove Street by 7:15. He loaded the truck in a specific order: perishables closest to the back doors, dry goods forward, the long and awkward packages flat on the bottom, and he had the route mapped in his head before he turned the key. It was not a glamorous life, but it was a precise one, and Marcus had learned the hard way that precision was the only luxury available to a man operating on a narrow margin. Lily was 8 years old and took mornings seriously. She was dressed and at the kitchen table with her backpack fully zipped by the time Marcus finished his coffee, which he had learned over 2 years to interpret not as impatience but as a form of consideration. She understood, in the wordless way children understood the things that mattered, that being ready on time was something her father needed from her, and she gave it without being asked. She had her mother's eyes, her grandmother's stubbornness, and an absolute inability to walk past a dog without stopping, which had made them late on 3 separate occasions and which Marcus had never once been able to be genuinely angry about. On this particular Tuesday morning she had important news. "My friend Cora says you can tell if it's going to snow by watching whether the birds are flying low." Marcus looked out the kitchen window at the gray November sky. "What are the birds doing?" Lily pressed her face to the glass, breath fogging the cold pane. "Flying medium? Then we're probably fine," he said, and she accepted this with the gravity it deserved and finished her toast. He drove her to school with the radio low and the heater working harder than it should have needed to, and she talked the entire way about a science project involving the water cycle and a classmate named Jordan who kept calling it the water circle, which Lily found philosophically troubling. Marcus listened to every word. He had learned, in 2 years of being the only parent Lily had, that listening was the most important thing he did every day. Not the most visible, Not the thing anyone would write down as an accomplishment, but the most important. He had been driving for reliable regional delivery for 2 years and 3 months. Before that, he had spent 11 years as a structural engineer at a firm called Harwick and Associates, where he had designed the bones of buildings, load-bearing systems, foundation infrastructure, the invisible architecture that kept tall things standing in heavy weather. He had been good at it. He had been, by every measurable standard, on the kind of trajectory that people in that profession pointed to when they talked about careers building toward something. Then his wife, Diane, got sick. And then, after 19 months of everything that illness asked of the people closest to it, she was gone. He had tried to keep the engineering job after. He had tried with the specific, methodical effort of a man who understood that trying was necessary and also understood, in some part of himself he hadn't yet made himself look at directly, that it was not going to be enough. Lily needed someone home by 3 o'clock. She needed someone who could leave a meeting to answer the school's call without it becoming a problem. She needed someone whose hours could bend around her needs the way a building's structure bent around the forces put on it. His couldn't. The firm was not unkind about it. But the math was the math, and Marcus had never been a man who argued with math. He had handed in his notice on a Thursday. He had picked Lily up from school on Friday, and they had spent the weekend on the apartment floor with a puzzle and no agenda. And on Monday morning he had started working out what came next. Driving had been the answer, at least for now. The hours were early and predictable. The work was physical and uncomplicated in a way that left his mind free to be present with Lily when he was with Lily. The pay was modest, sufficient provided he tracked what came in and spent only what was necessary. He did not think of it as permanent. He thought of it the way he thought about temporary structural supports, built for the weight of a specific period of time, not designed for forever, but adequate and honest while they were needed. He never talked about the engineering, not because he was ashamed of it, because it was a fact about the past, and Marcus had always been more interested in the present than in the stories people told about themselves in the past tense. The Hope Street shelter was his 4th stop on Tuesdays. It occupied a 3-story converted textile warehouse on the south side of the city, a long building of old red brick with freight elevators that had been retrofitted when the warehouse became something else. On any given night it served 240 residents. The ground floor held the intake office, the dining hall, and the food pantry. The second floor had a medical clinic that operated 3 days a week, and a clothing distribution room that smelled permanently of dryer sheets. The third floor was family housing, a long corridor of rooms with doors painted in colors someone had chosen carefully, understanding that color in an institution communicated something that paint colors in offices did not. Marcus had been delivering here for 8 months. He knew the loading dock. He knew which freight elevator button stuck on the second floor and required a specific sideways pressure to release. He knew that the kitchen staff accepted deliveries between 9:30 and 11, and that arriving outside that window started a conversation not worth having. He knew Renata at the intake desk, who had worked there 6 years and who had the particular competence of someone who had decided long ago that the work was worth doing and had stopped waiting for anyone to tell them they were right. He knew the woman in the blue sweater on the family floor whose name he had never learned and who thanked him every Tuesday with the directness of someone who dealt in concrete needs and understood when they had been met. What he knew about Craig Harmon, the shelter's director of operations, was this. Craig Harmon ran the building the way certain men ran things they did not own, with the exaggerated authority of someone who had confused proximity to power with power itself. Craig was in his mid-40s, physically neat in the specific way of men who understood appearance as a form of seriousness. He wore a badge on a lanyard that listed his title in capital letters and his name in a font slightly larger than necessary. He had an office on the second floor with a window facing the parking lot, and he had a habit of positioning himself near the entrance when deliveries arrived. Not to help, to observe. The observation had the quality of supervision that was less about ensuring quality and more about demonstrating that quality was being evaluated, which were different things that looked superficially the same. Marcus had delivered to this building 31 times. Craig Harmon had found something to correct on 22 of those visits. The corrections were always small and always technically arguable. An invoice that didn't precisely match the order notation. A temperature log that had been initialed rather than signed in full. A delivery vehicle parked 8 inches outside the designated loading area. A pallet configuration that differed from the facility's stated preference. Each time, Marcus had responded the same way. Without protest, without argument, correcting what Craig wanted corrected or documenting what Craig wanted documented, and then finishing the delivery and driving to the next stop. He had noticed that Craig never corrected the vendors who came in suits. He had noticed that Craig's manner changed entirely when the shelter's board members visited, became warm and accommodating in a way that belonged to a completely different person than the one Marcus dealt with on Tuesday mornings. He had noticed that the kitchen staff and the social workers moved around Craig with the practiced minimalism of people who had learned to take up as little of a difficult person's attention as possible. Marcus noticed all of this and said nothing about any of it. There was nothing to say that would make Tuesday mornings shorter. And the building mattered, and the people inside it mattered, and those two facts were heavier than Craig Harmon's behavior and always would be. He arrived at 9:47 with a full truck. Canned goods, dried beans, 20 cases of bottled water, 3 boxes of infant formula, and a pallet of blankets that the shelter had requisitioned 3 weeks ago and that Marcus had tracked through 2 rescheduled shipments and 1 warehouse error to make sure finally arrived today. He backed the truck to the dock with the unhurried competence of a man who had done it 31 times, deployed the pallet jack, and began the unload. He was on his 3rd trip through the freight entrance when Craig appeared. He was not alone. A woman walked beside him, a board member, Marcus assumed, or a major donor, in a coat that did not belong near a loading dock. She was listening to Craig with the polite attention of someone being given a considered tour of something Craig had been responsible for building. Craig looked at the cases stacked near the freight elevator, looked at his clipboard, and said, without looking at Marcus, "These invoices are wrong." Marcus set down the case he was carrying and waited. The water order was for 16-ounce bottles. Craig tapped the clipboard. "These are 12-ounce. Marcus reached into his breast pocket and produced his own copy of the requisition form. The order form specified 32 cases at 12-ounce. "I have the documentation here." He held it out. Craig did not take it. His eyes stayed on the clipboard. "I know what I ordered," he said, and his voice had risen by exactly enough to be audible to the woman in the coat standing 2 feet to his left. "I've been ordering for this facility for 4 years. I think I know what I specified." "The signed form reflects 12-ounce, Marcus said. "If there was an error in the original specification, my account manager can run through the order history and get you a corrected delivery within." "What I need," Craig said, cutting across him with the patience of a man explaining something simple to someone willfully slow, "is for you to deliver what we actually ordered instead of showing up with whatever happened to be loaded onto the truck this morning." He turned slightly toward the woman in the coat, as if the resolution of this situation were something he was performing for an audience. "This is a recurring issue with this vendor. Documentation problems." The woman in the coat looked at the form still in Marcus's hand. She looked at Craig, she looked at Marcus. Marcus kept his voice level and his face neutral. "I'd like you to take the documentation, Mr. Harmon. The form was signed by your operations coordinator on October 17th. The specification is clearly legible." He held it out again. Craig looked at it for the first time. A beat passed. Something moved through his expression quickly, a flash of recalculation, and then it was gone. "Regardless," he said, "this delivery doesn't meet our current requirements." Marcus looked at him steadily. He thought about the infant formula, already on the dock behind them, 3 boxes of it. He thought about the blankets on the pallet jack, 3 weeks delayed, and about the overnight forecast he had heard on the truck radio that morning. 23 degrees. He thought about the 3rd floor of this building, the colored doors, the woman in the blue sweater. "Mr. Harmon," he said, and his voice was quiet in the way that very careful things were quiet when their effect mattered more than their volume. "There are 240 people in this building. Some of them are children. Those blankets have been delayed for 3 weeks and the overnight temperature tonight is 23 degrees. If you want to refuse this delivery, I'll document it and escalate through the account manager." But I want to make sure we both understand what we're actually refusing." Craig's jaw tightened. The woman in the coat had gone completely still. "I'd like you," Craig said, placing each word with the deliberateness of someone who was aware that words placed this carefully couldn't be taken back, "to take your truck, your invoices, and your attitude out of my facility." He held eye contact for exactly the length of time required to make the authority of the statement feel total. "And you can consider this account under review. I'll be requesting a different driver for all future deliveries." He said it the way certain men said things when they had an audience and wanted the audience to understand the size of what they were capable of. Marcus understood immediately that it was a performance. He also understood that arguing in front of a performance's audience accomplished nothing, and that there was a version of this morning that did not end with the blankets reaching the 3rd floor, and that he needed to prevent that version from becoming the one that happened. He picked up his delivery bag. He looked at the dock, at the water and the formula and the blankets, at the freight elevator with its stubborn button and its scratched interior walls. He looked at Craig Harmon with the expression of a man who had decided something and was finished deciding it. He walked out. The November air caught him at the dock steps, cold and direct after the close warmth of the freight bay, and Marcus stood for a moment and let it. His hands were in his jacket pockets. He was not angry, or rather, what he felt lived in the same neighborhood as anger but had a different address. It was tiredness, the particular kind that accumulated not from physical work but from 31 repetitions of the same thing, from maintaining the same patience in the same conversation without being able to make the conversation come out differently. He had a call to make. The account manager. The incident documentation. The escalation process that should, in principle, resolve this. He pulled out his phone and found the number and then paused, because he had come around the corner of the building to the front entrance, and there was a woman sitting on the steps. She was on the top step near the building's main door with its bulletin board of flyers and its plastic-roofed overhang. A wool coat wrapped around her against the cold, silver hair that had come loose from whatever arrangement it had started the morning in. Both hands around a paper coffee cup. She was looking at the middle distance with the absorbed stillness of someone lost in thought that had been running a long time. Marcus looked at the cup. The angle of her wrists made it obvious that whatever had been in it was long gone. He put his phone back in his pocket. He walked up. He crouched down beside her and looked at her directly, and she looked back with eyes that were sharp and still and did not perform anything. Not distress, not gratitude in advance, not the particular expression that people sometimes adopted near shelters, the one that was about managing the expectations of whoever had chosen to approach them. Just direct and unhurried attention. "You eat today?" he asked. "Not yet," she said. He reached into his jacket pocket. $23. The pharmacy receipt folded behind it. He took the 20 and held it out to her, and she looked at it, and then she looked at his face, and what crossed her expression in the next few seconds was something he could not name. Not surprise. Not the uncomplicated relief of someone receiving help. Something more complex than either of those things. The expression of a person seeing something they had not expected to find in the specific place they were looking, and who was still working out what to do with the discovery. She took it. "Thank you," she said. "There's a place 2 blocks east that does soup until 3. He looked at the empty cup. "Can I grab you a coffee from inside before I go?" She studied him for a moment the way she had been studying him since he crouched down. Not casually, with the focused attention of someone who was cataloging something for reasons they hadn't explained. "I'm all right," she said. Then, "But thank you. For the 20 and for the other thing." "The other thing," he said. "You stopped," she said. Her voice was even and unhurried. "Most people have already decided what to see before they look." Marcus held her gaze. There was something in the quality of her attention that was different from ordinary attention, more structured, more deliberate, and he registered it without being able to account for it. "You going to be warm enough out here?" "I'll be going in shortly," she said. He stood. He nodded. He went back around the corner to make his call. He was sitting in the cab of the truck 37 minutes later, working through the incident documentation on his phone, when the freight bay door opened, and Craig Harmon came through it at a pace he had not used all morning. Not running. close. His lanyard swung against his chest. He was looking behind him over his shoulder at something Marcus couldn't see from the truck's angle, and the expression on his face was one Marcus did not have a reference point for, because it was not any of the versions of Craig Harmon he had observed over 31 deliveries. It was the expression of a man whose understanding of the morning had just been restructured by information he had not been prepared for. Marcus got out of the truck. He walked back toward the building, not because anyone had called him, but because something had shifted in the atmosphere of it, the way a load-bearing system shifted when the weight moved. Not dramatically, but in a way that someone trained to notice such things could feel before they could prove it. He came around the front of the building and stopped at the base of the entrance steps. The woman in the wool coat was standing in the lobby. She had given her coat to someone. A staff member stood holding it near the door, and she was standing in the center of the intake area in a silk blouse, the color of old ivory, and dark trousers that fit with the specific precision of clothing made for one body and no other. Her silver hair was pinned back properly, catching the institutional light from the overhead fixtures. She was not a large woman. She was somewhere in her early 70s, and she stood at approximately 5'4", and none of that had anything to do with the size of what she occupied in the room. She stood the way very few people learn to stand. Not with aggression, not with the performance of authority, but with the complete and undisturbed stillness of someone for whom being the most consequential person in a room had become so ordinary it no longer required announcement. People learn to stand that way only one way, by spending enough years being exactly that, until the standing became natural and the room simply reorganized itself around it. Craig Harmon was 4 feet away from her, and he had gone the color of the concrete wall at his back. Marcus recognized her the way people recognized individuals they had never met, from the ambient civic awareness that accumulated from a city's newspaper archives, from building dedications with photographs, from the low-level background knowledge of who had built what and why. Eleanor Voss. The Voss Foundation, which operated 14 properties across the city, among them the Hargrove Arts Center, the Meridian Community Clinic, and, Marcus understood in the specific clarity of a structural engineer tracking a load path to its origin, this building, the Hope Street Shelter, which Eleanor Voss had not merely donated to or funded, but had founded herself, in 1991, in a textile warehouse she had purchased with her own money for the specific purpose of creating it. She had also, 37 minutes ago, been sitting on concrete steps in a loosened wool coat with an empty paper coffee cup, watching who came and went through the freight entrance. Craig's mouth was moving. He had been attempting speech for what appeared to be several attempts and had not succeeded in producing a complete sentence in any of them. He would begin, Mr. Harmon started 3 times, each time with a slightly different opening and each time arriving at the same point, where the weight of what the sentence needed to carry became visible to him before it reached its period and the sentence stopped. Eleanor Voss did not look at him while he attempted this. She was looking at Marcus, not the way she had looked at him outside, with quiet attention and the expression that had no clean name, but with recognition. The specific look of a person who had been watching a thing and had finished watching and was ready to speak. Mr. Reed, she said. The lobby went quiet. 4 staff members who had been distributing themselves carefully around the perimeter of the situation stopped moving and went still. Renata, at the intake desk, had both hands flat on the counter and was looking at Eleanor with the expression of someone receiving information that rearranged several years of context simultaneously. Ms. Voss, Marcus said. Eleanor Voss turned then to Craig Harmon, and the quality of her attention shifted with the quiet precision of a compass needle finding north, and the people in the room felt the shift in their bodies before they processed it in their minds. I have been visiting this building for 31 years, she said. Her voice was conversational. She was not performing composure, she simply had it. The way people had things they had carried long enough for the carrying to become invisible. I come as I come. No announcement, no motorcade. I sit in the intake waiting room and I watch who gets helped and how quickly. I walk the residential floors. I eat in the dining hall on Wednesdays. I use the service entrance. She paused. Today I was outside for the specific purpose of watching how deliveries were received. who came to this building and how we treated them. She let that sit for a moment. It had the quality of something structural. I watched you refuse a complete delivery this morning, she said. A delivery that was properly requisitioned, properly documented, and executed by a driver who has made 31 deliveries to this facility without a single substantiated issue. I watched you use a minor specification question, a question that your own signed paperwork answered, to manufacture grounds for rejection. She paused. I also watched you send back a pallet of blankets that this facility has needed for 3 weeks. Tonight's overnight low is 23 degrees. Our family wing has 17 children under the age of 10. Craig's mouth opened. Nothing came out. I also watched, Eleanor continued, and her voice did not change in temperature or volume by so much as a degree, a delivery driver leave your freight bay after being dismissed, walk to the front of this building, sit down with a woman he had never met, and give her a meaningful portion of what appeared to be everything he had in his wallet. Without hesitation, without looking around to see who was watching, without needing anyone to notice, she looked at Marcus. Something in her expression was not sentimentality, but was something adjacent to it. Something that had been genuinely moved, and was not embarrassed about having been moved. She looked back at Craig. I would like you to explain to me, she said, in terms I can understand, how a man of that character has been managing 31 deliveries to this facility while being treated the way I watched you treat him this morning. Craig Harmon did not explain it. He began to, 3 more times, and each time the sentence dissolved before it reached a period, because explanations required ground to stand on, and the ground Craig had been standing on all morning had been removed by a silver-haired woman in a silk blouse who had been sitting on concrete steps with an empty coffee cup 40 minutes ago. Renata moved. 1 step forward, hands coming up slightly, and then she stopped herself and looked at Eleanor. Eleanor looked at her. Go ahead, she said simply. Renata's jaw worked for a moment. She looked at Marcus. Then she looked at Eleanor Voss with the directness of someone who had been waiting a long time for the room in which to say something true. He was always right, she said. Every single time. The invoices matched the orders. The temperatures were logged correctly. The forms were done properly. Mr. Harmon, she stopped, started again. It was never about the invoices. The room held those 7 words the way rooms held things that had been true for a long time and had been finally, out loud, named. Eleanor Voss looked at Craig Harmon for a period of silence that lasted exactly as long as it needed to. Then she said, with the clean finality of someone closing a door that had been open long enough, "You'll be escorted out today. Human Resources will be in contact by Thursday morning. The delivery will be completed this morning, and I will be making a personal call to Reliable Regional to ensure this account remains active and in good standing." She looked at Renata. "You'll be managing operations through the end of the week while I arrange a proper transition. I'd like you to start with the family wing. Make sure the blankets are distributed before this evening." Renata straightened in a way that was not about posture. "Yes, ma'am," she said. Craig Harmon unclipped his badge from the lanyard with hands that were not entirely steady. He set it on the intake desk. He straightened his jacket once, with the automatic gesture of a man trying to preserve the last intact piece of his dignity, and he walked toward the exit without another word. The door opened. The door closed. The November light came through it briefly and then was gone. Eleanor Voss came back outside 10 minutes later. Marcus was still there, at the base of the front steps, because he had not known quite where else to go while the lobby settled. She came down the steps and stood beside him, her coat back around her shoulders, and they both looked at the street for a moment without speaking. A bus went by. 2 pigeons resumed their earlier argument near the curb. "You didn't know who I was," he said. It was not a question or an apology, just a fact offered in the spirit of accuracy. "I know," she said. That was rather the point. He thought about the $20. He thought about Friday. "How long?" she asked. "Absorbing what he gave you each week without making it anyone's problem." "Long enough," Marcus said. Why? He had given himself this answer before, in the cab of the truck on more than one Tuesday afternoon. He had never been fully satisfied with it. He gave it now in the closest form to true that he had. I didn't want to lose the account, he said. The people in this building needed the deliveries. Every time I drove away, I thought about that more than I thought about him. Eleanor was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You were a structural engineer." Marcus looked at her. Before, she added, "Your account file has a background check. I pulled it on my phone while I was outside. Old habit." She paused. "Harwick and Associates, 11 years. Civil engineering degree from a program that doesn't produce graduates lightly." Another pause. "You designed buildings. I deliver supplies to them now," Marcus said. "Yes," she said. "For your daughter. Her name is Lily," he said. Eleanor nodded. She looked at him with the steady, undecorated attention of someone who respected things without needing to make a presentation of the respect. "I'm going to give you back your $20, she said. "You don't have to do that," Marcus said. "I know." She reached into her coat pocket and produced a bill, folded once. She held it toward him, and he took it, and looked at it, and looked at her. "Ms. Voss," he said, "I have an advisory position that has been vacant for 14 months, she said, in the tone of someone continuing a sentence rather than changing the subject. The Voss Foundation portfolio includes 11 shelter and community center properties across the city. Several are in buildings that were not designed for their current use. We need someone to evaluate structural feasibility on proposed renovations, identify what needs doing, and tell us in plain language what it will cost and what will happen if we don't do it." She looked at the brick face of the building behind them. "Part-time. The hours are flexible. I have been told specifically that they can be structured around a school schedule." She met his eyes. "I don't fill positions as an act of generosity, Mr. Reed. I fill them because the work needs doing, and because I want the person doing it to understand that it needs doing. Those are the only criteria." Marcus stood with the bill in his hand and felt the specific weight of a moment that had arrived without preparation. He was a man who did not trust what arrived quickly. He had learned that the things worth keeping were the ones you had to build slowly. He looked at the building. He looked at the south wall, the one he had been walking past for 8 months. He had calculated, in the quiet automatic way of a structural mind, that the south wall had a load distribution issue somewhere in the second-floor framing. He had never mentioned it to anyone. He had no standing to mention it. He had been delivering canned goods. "I have a delivery to finish," he said. "Of course," Eleanor said. He looked at her. "Then I'd like to talk about the position." "Good," she said simply. She looked at the building one more time. The old brick and the November light on its windows. The bulletin board inside the glass door. "I'll be inside. Take your time." A small pause. "Make sure the blankets reach the family wing." "Yes, ma'am," he said. She went inside. Marcus stood on the steps for a moment with the folded bill in his hand. He tucked it into his jacket pocket. Not the same pocket as the pharmacy receipt. A different one. Then he picked up his delivery bag and went back around to the freight dock to finish what he had come to do. The dock door was already up when he got there. Renata had sent 2 kitchen workers down, and they worked in comfortable, efficient silence, the kind that developed between people who had all decided the same thing without needing to discuss it. Marcus took the blankets first, stacking them carefully, riding the freight elevator to the 3rd floor. He delivered them to the woman in the blue sweater who managed the family wing, and she thanked him with the direct, specific gratitude of someone who dealt in real needs and understood when they had been met. He signed out at 11:42. He sat in the truck for a few minutes before he started it. He did not think about Craig Harmon. He thought about the south wall on the 2nd floor and the load distribution problem he had been silently calculating for 8 months and had not yet had standing to mention. He thought about the 11 other buildings in Eleanor Voss's portfolio that had not been designed for their current use. He thought about what buildings needed to be able to do the work they were asked to do, and how seldom anyone thought to ask the person best positioned to tell them. He started the truck and finished the route. That evening, Lily drew horses at the kitchen table while Marcus heated soup on the stove. It was a horse phase of some duration that showed no signs of resolving itself. She had strong opinions about accurate horse anatomy that exceeded her current drawing ability by a significant margin, which she acknowledged without being discouraged by it. She was filling in a horse's mane when Marcus set the soup down and sat across from her. "Something happened today," he said. Lily looked up. "A woman I met at work offered me a different kind of job." He watched her face. "Like the old kind. Figuring out how buildings work. Making sure they're safe." Lily set down her pencil. She studied him with the focused consideration of a child who treated her father's news as information worth processing carefully. "Do you want to?" she asked. He thought about the south wall. He thought about 11 buildings across the city. He thought about Eleanor Voss sitting on cold concrete steps and the way she had looked at him on his way back out with the expression of a person who had just seen something they hadn't been certain still existed. "Yeah," he said, "I think I do." Lily picked up her pencil. "Then you should," she said, and returned to the horse with the economy of a child who had received satisfactory information and had no further questions. Marcus watched her draw. He watched the careful way she held the pencil and the way her tongue pressed against her lower lip when the detail required full concentration. The kitchen window held the last of the November light, pale and fading, and the soup sent a thin curl of steam up from the bowls on the table. He had woken up that morning with $23 and a pharmacy receipt. He had given away most of the $23 to a woman he had never met. He had not known who she was. He had not needed to. The $20 had been the $20. The crouching down on cold concrete had been what it was. None of it had been a calculation. It had simply been the shape of what he was when no one who mattered was watching, which was the only version of character that had ever mattered to him. He had not known who she was. That had been, as it turned out, rather the whole point. What you give away from a full place costs you nothing. What you give away from an empty one tells you everything about who you actually are. The person least interested in proving what they have is sometimes the one who has the most worth proving. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you haven't subscribed yet, stick around. There is a lot more coming.